What is happening, guys? Kadi Plays here. I'm bringing you another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. And in today's video, I'm going to be bringing you guys part 2 of my series Basics of Deck Building for Yu-Gi-Oh! For Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, like whatever format you're playing. This should be pretty applicable. I want to go ahead and apologize for saying that I am on Dueling Book, as always, because, well, my computer broke on me, and I cannot record actual Master Duel gameplay at the moment. So we're stuck with Dueling Book for a while, but it's actually not that bad because Dueling Book makes it pretty easy to just look at a bunch of different cards. So yeah, we're on here and get that out of the way. What this video is going to cover is a few different things. It's going to be much shorter than part 1, which if you haven't checked it out, please go check out part 1 of this series. It was Basics of Deck Building, episode 1 on types of decks. So in that video, it's much longer than this one's going to be. We covered all the different types of decks in a general sense, right? So there's combo decks, mid-range decks, stun, control, OTK, so on and so forth. That video is going to kind of lead into this video, because after you've decided what kind of deck you want to play, and maybe even what specific deck within a category you've decided to play, you then move on to step 2, which you have your engine. So the example that I have here, wherever I can find it, we have Sword Soul. So this obviously falls in the mid-range category. It's somewhat somewhat a hybrid between a control deck, but also a combo deck. So it's a little bit mid-range. We have the engine here, right? So this is by no means a perfect version of Sword Soul. This is just a standard starting point for Sword Soul, at least for me and the different people that I play with. Right, we got the pretty consistent, well-rounded 10E engine and Sword Soul engine here, and it comes out to 28 cards. Which means, obviously, we have 12 cards to do whatever we want with. And that's going to be kind of the purpose of this video. It's like taking your basic deck engine and deciding, okay, well, what do I do to fill the rest of that engine? And what is correct and what is incorrect for the deck that I'm playing. Now, of course, I'm not going to go over every single deck in this video because I simply don't have time to do so. But I am going to talk about some generic stuff that you can then, go on and do some further research on. Ask me in the comment section below. I can probably be a little bit more help down there, talking about your specific deck and so on and so forth. But the first thing I want to talk about is staple cards. Staples, whether that be hand traps, board breakers, just generic cards, whatever it might be. I mean, we could even throw, I know I already had that in the Sword Soul section, but we can throw Pot of Desires in here, Pot of Prosperity, stuff like that. Because these are going to be generic for some decks. These are going to be great for some decks, but not great for other ones. And that's going to be kind of the same thing with all the different cards we talk about, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is hand traps. So most decks play hand traps. Most decks can play hand traps. And if you have 12 spots available in your deck, it's not unreasonable to say, okay, well, I'm just going to play 12 hand traps in my deck because they're really good going first, because they act as defensive cards when you pass your turn to your opponent, but they're also good going second because they can potentially interrupt your opponent or make them use resources. So all in all, they're really good options. The biggest issue with hand traps, in my opinion, is the fact that you need a lot of them. So when I say a lot, I generally mean 2. So hypothetically speaking, if you're playing against a Sword Soul deck and they go, I don't know, normal summon Mogi, activate effect. And you're like, okay, well, I have an effect Veiler in my hand, or an Infinite Impermanence. I'm going to stop their monster effect so they are not going to be able to synchro summon. Okay? Well, let's say you go Veiler on their Mogi, but then they chain Heavenly Dragon Circle to tribute the Mogi, to then go add a worm from their deck to their hand to play around your hand trap. Well, then you're in a really unfortunate position because they just beat your hand trap. And oftentimes, pretty much all the top tier decks, all the modern decks, are going to be able to play through at least one hand trap very easily. Now, this is just a very isolated example, right, of Sword Soul in particular. But most decks can do something like this. Or they'll bait out your hand traps with, cards that they don't really care if they get hand trapped and then continue to play forward. And they're going to end on almost as good of an end board as they would without you even having a hand trap, which is very unfortunate for you as the person who just wasted a card, essentially. Which is why, in my opinion, when you're hand trapping a deck, first of all, you need to hand trap the deck properly, and that's going to be another video for another day. But you also need to have enough hand traps to truly limit their plays enough. which is why I say you need usually generically at least 2 hand traps in your opening hand to stop somebody. If your deck can't afford to do that, let's say you're not playing Sword Soul, but you're playing Despia. Despia is a much tighter deck than Sword Soul is, meaning your engine generally takes up a lot more cards than the Sword Soul engine does. So you're usually going to end up with like 5 or 6 flex spots in Despia if you want to stay at 40 cards. That's not an exact number, but that's just a rough estimate. When that happens, you're in a situation where, like, okay, well, do I want to play 5 hand traps or 6 hand traps, or do I want to play something different to have more of an impact? And that's where cards like Board Breakers come in. That's where cards like Dark Ruler No More, Forbidden Droplets, Evenly Match, maybe even Triple Tactics Talent, which this could be somewhat closer to consider like a hand trap-like card, because it helps you play through hand traps. Tactics is a weird card, but mainly what I want to focus on is cards like Dark Ruler or Forbidden Droplet. And these are cards that you don't need to play a lot of these for them to have high impact. You really only need to draw one of them in your opening hand for it to be a very impactful thing on your, to break your opponent's board, right? So if your opponent establishes, let's say your opponent's playing Sword Soul and you don't have any hand traps, and they end on a Baron to floor, a Grandmaster, so a Monster Negate, and a Sword Soul Blackout, right? That's 3 interruptions. That's 3 forms of interruption. That's a very mediocre board. If you open Dark Ruler No More, you trade Dark Ruler No More for 2 of their negates. Now you still have to play through their Sword Soul Blackout in this case, but that's obviously much better than you using like an Ash Blossom for let's say their Pot of Desires, but they still ended on those 3 interruptions. So there's give and take with both of them. There's certain situations where hand traps are better. There's certain situations where board breakers are better. And it's really going to depend on the deck that you're playing, the goals that you're trying to accomplish, and also like the format that you're in, right? Because Dark Ruler No More, Forbidden Droplet, they're not good in every single format. Just like Ash Blossom, Nibiru, Veiler, they're not good in every format. So the more I talk about this, the more difficult I feel like it becomes to explain, because it's very dependent on your deck, your opponent's deck, the meta, a lot of different things. But these are all things you need to think about when you are deck building if you want to see success at the highest level, whether that be climbing the ranks of ladder or competing in tournaments, right? So that's kind of just like an introduction to this. And then down here, I just have some generic staple extra deck cards. And this more is going to be aligning towards when you're building your deck, what do you want your end board to be? So these cards up here are more, how do you want to play against other decks? These cards down here, and the cards that I'm about to show you over in this category, are going to be like, what do you want your end board to be? So let's say again, you're playing Sword Soul, and you're like, okay, Sword Soul's got a very clear objective. Jump back over to Sword Soul, if I can find it. Yes, right here. So Sword Soul's got a very clear objective. The goal is end on a level 10 Synchro, a level 8 Synchro, in either a Blackout or a Protos. Okay? So it's basically 3 forms of interruptions, give or take, depending on the situation. And then whatever cards you have in hand that could count as interruptions, so on and so forth. This deck's got a very clear objective. But what if we talk about a deck like Phantom Knights? If this ever loads, I apologize. But if we talk about a deck like Phantom Knights, this is not the Phantom Knight deck list I want to say. This is a monstrosity, and I'm sorry you guys have to see it. This one right here. So this is the deck profile, basically, that I did on Phantom Knights a few weeks ago. A deck like this has a much different inboard goal than Sword Soul does. And it's like, okay, well, why is that? Because Phantom Knights don't have engine cards. When I say engine cards, I mean like extra deck cards that are designed specifically for Phantom Knights that you want to end your turn on. I mean, Rusty's really nice, right? Ending on Rusty's really nice, but Rusty in and of itself is not an interruption. Fogblade is. So Fogblade can be part of your end board, and that can be like, okay, if I'm playing Phantom Knights, I want to end on 1 or 2 Fogblades, and that's something to strive for, right? But generally in a deck like Phantom Knights, like this one that we're seeing on screen now, is going to end on a DPE and an Artifact Dagda with a Scythe. So it's going to end on a Scythe lock. So it's like saying, Well, what does your deck accomplish good and what does your deck accomplish bad, and what inboards can it establish is something that you need to think about. And that factors really heavily into how you decide to build your deck with cards outside of your engine requirements. I hope that makes sense. So it's like we have the Phantom Knight engine here, right? All these cards are kind of mandatory for Phantom Knights. And then we're like, okay, well, what other engines do we want to play to make those better? And obviously for this one, we've picked the Adventure engine, the Destiny Hero engine, the Artifact engine, right? And a bunch of hand traps. Moving back over to this little tab, if I can find it, the Engines tab right here. So we jump back over here and we talk about some of those, right? You're like, okay, well, if my deck can play the Adventure Package engine, do we do so? Right? And that's a question you have to ask yourself. If you're playing Sword Soul, you're like, do I play Adventure? You're like, well, no, I don't play Adventure because I have 3 normal summons in the deck. I have Mo Yi, I have Taya, and we have Ecclesia, which is sometimes a normal summon, right? You're like, obviously, no, I'm not going to play Adventure and the Adventure engine in that deck because this benefits decks that don't use normal summon effects, right? So this was really good in like the 3-Axis deck that just normal summon Sangan, which doesn't have an activated effect on summon that you don't want to activate, something like that. It was also good in Dragon Links because you can play Dragon Links in a way where you don't need to use your normal summon. You can just use your normal summon on a more generic card in Dragon Links, like a Rocket Tracer or something. Like you don't need to summon a Seifert, whatever it might be. That's why it was really good in that deck for so long. So yeah, basically, I'm sorry, this is also an incorrect engine. We do not have 3 rights. We only have 2 of those. Let's see if... So this is the OCG ban list, but it's close enough to Master Duel. Whatever. In Master Duel, we have 1 Enchantress, 2 rights, so it's just flipped, and then Griffin's obviously not banned. I don't know why Griffin's banned, to be honest with you, but whatever. This is an engine that's like splashable in some decks, but not in every deck. And when you're building your deck, you should consider something like this. Same thing with like the Destiny Hero stuff. Like obviously this is a very expanded Destiny Hero engine. You're not going to play both Malicious and Dasher, right? You're going to play one or the other. But it's like, you need to ask yourself the question like, hey, do I want my inboard to have Destiny Hero Phoenix and Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer on it? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you need to play these cards. Then you should put these cards in your deck. Also, you should be asking yourself, does it conflict with my deck? Because there's certain times when you don't want to play an engine because it conflicts with your stuff. Now, Verity's a really, really nice card just for generic purposes because you can just end your turn by making Verite and then send the Fusion Destiny or send the Branded Fusion and bypass basically all the drawbacks of it. So that's something that you probably want to consider when you're building a deck is like, hey, can I make Verite? And B, do I want to make Verite to make my inboard either have a DPE or a Mirror Jade on it? So I should probably put this Albaz stuff up here with the Destiny Hero stuff because these are very similar engines, right? You can just throw the Albaz engine into a deck and just go Verite, send Albaz, send Verite to make Mirror Jade. And then all of a sudden you got a Mirror Jade on board, right? It's great. You can also do with the DP stuff. Obviously, I'm rambling now. Moving on. You can also play the Branded Fusion, the Branded Engine, a little bit differently. You can expand it a little bit. And as long as your deck can, sustain it and can play cards like Branded Opening, like Branded Fusion, and not have the drawbacks of it, you can play a more full, complete engine of a Branded Despia to kind of expand your deck out further. Like I know me personally, recently, I entered a tournament with Eldritch because I was trying to troll some Fluender East players. I ended up getting top 8. I talked about that in a previous video. But I played Eldritch, and then I played a really heavy Branded Despia engine because they don't conflict with one another very much. Right? I was able to play 3 Alibers, a Tragedy, an Adlib, a bunch of Branded Fusion, Fallen of Albaz, so on and so forth. And I was able to play a Dogmatica engine, play the Nadir Servant, the Dogmatica Punishments, the Ecclesia, so on and so forth. And I was able to put all these different engines together into one deck, and it flows very nicely. When you're trying to decide what you want your inboard to be or what you want your deck to accomplish, you should consider what engines work good with your deck and which ones don't. And the Branded engine is a deck that works with a lot of different things. The main drawbacks are the fact that you can only fusion summon when you play this card, Branded Opening, and I think a few other ones. You can only fusion summon when you do that for that turn. You can't link summon, you can't synchro summon, you can't exceed summon. so on and so forth. But if your deck can sustain that, it's great, right? So anyways, enough rambling about those. I think you guys probably get the point. Moving on to two other engines that I just want to talk about there. These are not like as prevalent, I would say, as the ones that have been mentioned before, but like the Danger engine. This is like really popular. This goes in and out of popularity. It was just really popular in the TCG and even the OCG with the tier element strategy, which obviously we don't have in Master Duel yet, but we will be getting within the next 2-3 months, hopefully. I say hopefully. Some people aren't hopeful for that, but I am, because I want some new format stuff. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. The Danger package is really interesting. You can also play this in decks like Phantom Knights. You can play it in decks like Sky Striker. Spiral. Scratch that. No, not Sky Striker. Spiral, Orchist, Dark World, you name it. It's got a lot of utility, and basically it's because this is engine. It's an engine that enables you to discard cards in your hand by random. Obviously, it's random choice. Your opponent randomly chooses a card from your entire hand, then you discard that card, and then you gain effects depending. Then Nessie, for example, if the card was not Danger Nessie, you special summon one Danger Nessie from your hand, and if you do, you draw a card. So, and then if this card was discarded, you can add one Danger card from your deck to your hand, and then they all basically have the same effect where they can keep on activating to make your opponent discard a card from your hand, and they all gain effects accordingly. These are just some of the most popular ones. There's also other really good ones too, like Mothman and the Snake and stuff like that. But again, rambling about stuff I don't need to ramble about. This is good in decks that need to just put mindless bodies on the board, because these are really good at doing that. They don't cost resources, really. And they're also good in decks that want to get the majority of the random cards in their engine into the graveyard, or at least they don't care if they go to the graveyard. So that's why it's really good in Phantom Knights, right? Because you can play the level 3s, which this is limited to 2 in Master Duel. That's why I just only have 2 here. For whatever reason, it's not in OCG, and TCG's at 1, OCG's at 3, Master Duel's at 2. Okay, that's cool, whatever. But anyways, it's really good in like Phantom Knights because you can play this and you can play the Danger, the Snake, right? You can play these, and they're just level 3 bodies that you can put on board that force you to discard cards from your hand. That can be all of your Phantom Knight stuff that all get effects in the graveyard. So it's a really good like rank 3 utility engine in that sense. And it's also, we got applications for the other stuff, like Bigfoot is a really good going second card. Because if this card is discarded, you can target one card on one face-up card your opponent controls, destroy it. So that's enough about the Danger engine. It works really good in decks that want to just put bodies on the board and also want to discard cards. Yeah, sorry for rambling, guys. I'm bad at this stuff. Moving on to the last engine I wanted to talk about, and that's the Tri-Brigade engine. This is basically an engine that can go into any deck that plays like Beast Warriors, or Wing Beast. Like, it's kind of crazy how you can kind of just splash this engine. No, I do not want to make that my favorite card. What? You can kind of just splash the Tri-Brigade stuff into any deck you want that plays these different cards, and you're going to see a lot of great results from it. Like, we see it all the time in Master Duel, where it's not super competitive, but we can see decks like Gladiator Beast actually be somewhat good because you just put a Tri-Brigade engine in them, and then you're able to do Glad Beast stuff and have fun with Gladiator Beast, but also have like the consistency and power of a Tri-Brigade engine. Same thing with like Crystal Beast. To a lesser extent, Luna Light, because Luna Light's actually like a competent strategy. Like it's got, I'm not saying Gladiator Beast and Crystal Beast aren't competent and everything like that necessarily, but Luna Light's just a better engine than those are in general. So yeah. It's really nice. It's nice to have engines like this in the game that you can kind of just like splash into anything you want, that as long as it falls in the requirements, right? Like Beast Warrior, Wing Beast. So, yeah. That is going to do it for me. These are obviously not all the engines in the game. There are a lot of them out there. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out in the future that's already out in the game that I didn't mention in this video because simply don't have time to talk about everything in the game. But if you have any questions about any specific decks, any specific engines, please let me know in the comment section below, and I will do my best to give you an as educated answer as possible in the comment section below. I really appreciate when you guys do that, and I love talking about the game. let me know what you guys think about this video. Was this helpful for part 2? This is going to kind of move into the next stage, which is going to be actual like tech choices and probability. So stay tuned for that. I'm probably going to be trying to upload that next week, but of course we'll see. But anyways, again, that is going to do it for me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this video. I appreciate you guys all for all liking and commenting and subscribing. Support's been insane recently. And of course, I will see you all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.